Midrange Hell. Since the unfortunate event that took place last September, there seems to have been a huge movement within the cEDH meta to centralize around mulliganing for Rhetoric and playing for the long game. Some have even gone as far as to proclaim turbo decks as dead. I am here to unpack that answer. Why are we here? And should we even be here? But first, who am I and why should you listen to me? I am Pontus. You might have seen me on the cEDH TV gameplay channel, and as my top deck profile does not show, I am, well, at least my win rate on this small cEDH channel where I play with my friends shows that I'm worthy of listening to. Okay, maybe there's no good reason for you to actually listen to me, but I've been playing cEDH for more time than most people within this format. And the one thing that age brings you is clarity. I've seen metas come and go. I've trudged through the ages of Flash Hulk. I've seen a time where people didn't think Breach and Dockside were all-time staples. I have, of my own volition, put Oakham Adversary within my cEDH decks. All this to say, we've been here before. What happened last time, you probably won't expect. So why are we here? With the bans, we as a format lost access to two of the best fast mana producers we've ever had access to. And something Turbo needs in abundance is mana. And that's not even to mention the new hotness, Flash. Well, not you. The other one. One Upon a Wind and its ilk was kind of a meme to people as it was first released. To quote a friend of mine, maybe if you play a necrocentric deck, I guess? Well, sadly, to the bane of all tournament organizers, that's not really how that card turned out. The common feeling within the player base is that it isn't really worth putting a win on a stack, because you'll either get countered or they will just win on top of you with this new meme flashcards. And the thing you'll never expect me to say is that they aren't actually entirely wrong. With all the free interaction, flash enablers, Mystics, Mystic Remorse, Espers, you name it, winning the game early in the Midrange Hell can actually be pretty challenging. It only takes one player to mulligan for interaction and you can be dead in the water. So then, isn't Midrange Hell the truth? Natural progression of the meta? Well, not quite. First of all, I want to clarify that in this video it will be more accurate to say that what I'm discussing is tournament EDH, for the more recent time period at least. While the distinction isn't all that huge, actually it's quite large. Within cEDH, over time, you can see the ebb and flow of multiple things. Interaction, mana rocks, stacks, rituals, wheels, draw engines, necro. All of those are subject to this ebb and flow. In my mind, there are relatively clear eras that you can actually be pointed to and that we can expect. Those are the Paradox Engine era, culminating in the banning of our poor little engine, the Flash era, which in my opinion is the original Midrange Hell, and that era culminated in Assassin's Oracle being printed, and thus the banning of Flash a bit later. The post-Flash Turbo era, that was largely dominated by Golos of all things. The second coming of Midrange Hell, and the rise of Breach and Evolution style decks. The decks popular here would be something like Tymna Thrasios when you pod the Tymna into Seedborn Muse with the Eldritch Evolution. I remember the brewer, not the name of the deck. Then we had the Cody era, and yeah, we were pretty bad. Rograck literally existed, and we played Cody. I can't really answer to that. Then we had the actual formation of cEDH as a competitive format, which was kind of the wild west, and I think local metas were more defined at that time. We didn't really have a global feeling about the meta, but then we had Mardu Summer. But following Mardu Summer, we actually had the fourth coming of Midrange Hell, and after that, we had what I would call the Rogue Side Domination era. And yeah, I don't need to answer for that. And now, here we are in the post-ban fifth coming of Midrange Hell. I'm not gonna try to mislead you. There's a bit of correlation, not causation, happening in this timeline, to be fair, but the overall trend still stands. As we descend deeper into the depth of hell, all it takes is that one spark to bring us out, be that Golos, Cody, Mardu, or Rogsai. It's also worth noting that before the emergence of regular large events, much of the cEDH meta view was based on 1 to 3 tournaments a year, and most players were just way less experienced. This is to say that the early eras are pretty loosely defined, and your variance with them and your experience with them can vary. There are also some everlasting patterns and decks that exist, but might not have been meta-defining. As an example, Tymna Crom and its early iterations of what is today mostly called Blue Farm popped up all the way back in the post-Flash Turbo era, and slowly picked up steam to finally become the meta leader it is today. You can even argue that the earliest iterations were developed during the Flash Hulk times, with Opus Thief, where you would just wheel to disrupt people sandbagging their Flash Hulks. Maybe that's relevant today, wheeling away those Born Upon a Wind sandbags? I don't know. But why does Turbo emerge out of Midrange Hell? Shouldn't Midrange Hell be its natural enemy? So imagine this. You sit down on a table, ready to play your next round of your local tournament. You look around at your opponents and see Rocco. Well, nice. No interaction. None. Okay. I need to respect them so he doesn't just run away with the game. But then you see it. Rogside. No, we're only 2 blue players. We need to work together to make sure they doesn't just win for free. And thus, Rogside loses. So there we have it. Midrange Hell beats Turbo. So how does Turbo ever come back? If all it takes is for the table to work together and not lose to it, how does it ever feel dominating? That's actually a multi-layered question, but let's start in the descent into hell. Over time, this pattern of just stop the Turbo player solidifies people's belief into that Turbo isn't good anymore, and they write it off as an option. This specific game, maybe Rocco even won, after the blue players gave them just enough time to develop their board of creatures and just cast the game-winning Rocco. And doesn't this just show us that slower creature-centric decks are the way to go in Midrange Hell? Maybe we should even include some large, high-value creature to really capitalize on this slow game state. Also, people don't really even run NOS anymore, so do we really need this spell in our decks? And the moment the midrange decks pops out their blue commander for Magda to circumvent those pesky counterspells, or maybe swap out their free interaction for that use and never miss it to win the long game. Then, all of a sudden, a turn 2 NOS just resolves. Especially if we as a community agree that Turbo is dead, then that deck isn't even that threatening anymore. Until you just lose, I guess. These examples are a large oversimplification of things though. If we accept that we live in a midrange hell, even if we cut interaction, we might still be agreeable with our opponents to stop the Turbo player. What needs to happen is often more fundamental, because 1 Turbo deck is pretty easy to stop, but 2? Now it's pretty hard. So how does this fundamental shift happen? Honestly, I'm not entirely sure, but I have my hunches and opinions. In some regards, it's just hype. Building for a specific strategy or deck, like when Mardu Summer got popular, it's actually really fun, and as a community it can be really uplifting as an experiment. But to get there, there is some even more fundamental reasons. And to address them, we actually first need to address the fundamentals of winning the game. To establish a base, what would you say is a respectable win rate in cEDH? 50%? 75%? Or maybe you're more reasonable and know the math and answer 25%. And this question is pretty interesting, because as a 4-player freefall, our starting win rate is just that, 25%. And if you were to increase your win rate by being 50% better than all your opponents, you would get the amazing win rate of 37.5%. Wait, you're saying that me being 50% better than all of my opponents, yet I'm still losing more than 60% of my games? That doesn't sound right. In a 1v1 format, being 50% better than your opponents would leave you with a 75% base win rate. What this basically means for our format is that our format is just way more volatile. And this doesn't even include the external factors, such as your seat position and potential game matchups. This leaves us in quite a spot. How does one optimize their odds of winning? Even doubling your odds leaves you at just 50% chance to win. Here, there are basically 2 schools of thought. There's the school of minimizing risk and the school of maximizing opportunity. Easily exemplify these schools of thought. Let's analyze this board state. You have in Agila 2 warriors and 5 mana. Mons over there is completely open. In your hand, you have a gamble and a whatever. Let's just call it a land. If you gamble for Drevi, you have a 50% chance just to win immediately. But if you discard it, you no longer have the mana for even an Agile activation, meaning it'll take at least another turn for you to guaranteed kill the table with your activations. The School of Maximizing Opportunity sees a doubling of the base win rate and fires off. School of Minimizing Risk sees a risk to discard their 1 and core combo piece, while also losing out on the important kill clock and holds back. In this specific scenario, there are of course additional factors that would matter in the real game, but it kind of works as a simplification of how the 2 main schools would view the game state. Another fun example is Demonic Consultation. If you've watched our gameplay for a while, you can see that I, and in some regard Mons, are firm believers in consulting for value. And that's not because we're insane, or well, not entirely, but rather because we determine the upside of the card we'd get of the consult is worth more to our win rate than the about 10 to 20% risk of just dying. But this is very much in the mindset of maximizing opportunity. We're fine with the risk of losing, because if we don't, we've greatly increased our chance of winning. On the other side of the coin, playing it slower, we might be able to, over several optimizing plays and good politicking, be able to work out a similar win rate differential. When it comes to which school of thought is correct, there actually isn't a clear answer. Or well, the answer is that it very much depends on the board state and, well, a lot of different factors. My personal thought though are that cEDH players trend towards minimizing risk way too much. One of the largest level up moments I think most people will ever have is when they realize the difference between playing to win and playing not to lose. But to win, you have to first not lose, right? Well, sort of, but not quite. It is right that if someone tries to win before you have to survive the attempt to be able to win yourself. But way too often, I see people for that reason view the interaction in their hand as a game plan or a lifeline. And here's a drum I will keep on hitting for probably the rest of my Magic career. Interacting is what you do when you don't actively have a plan and not actually a plan in itself. Over time, I've had a lot of people approach me like I'm great at this game, and well, as my record shows, that hasn't really been something I agree with. Over time though, I think I've finally come to understand what it is that actually differentiates me or them. In every game state, there are two questions on my mind. How do I win from here? And how do I get the maximum value out of every card in my hand? And that is honestly what I feel many other people lack. They're more afraid of what their opponents are going to do than they are excited for the things they can do themselves. I watched this happen live in many of the people I've coached, or well, not coached, but helped over time. And in my experience, it seems to be deeply entrenched in many of them. And why wouldn't it? It feels better to lose with the feeling, if I only got to untap, I would have won. Then it feels getting your win stopped and then just stop taking and praying for 2 turns in a row until you actually lose. The problem is that in both of these cases, you lost, but in just one of them, you actually had the chance to win. It's also time for me to blow the lid of something I've been thinking about for a long time. How does the top tournament players keep on winning? Are they just built different? Do they know the secret language to truly understand the heart of the cards? Well, no, of course. The best players of the format are overall better mechanically than the average player. But in my opinion, they usually aren't the best in the world mechanically, as their record would suggest. What they are good at is, at its core, manipulation. They convince you not to win when you actually have a window. They convince you that you as table really need to interact with something, when it's really not as threatening as whatever they're doing, or even if it's just threatening to them. All in all, they convince you to act in a way that favors them. This is actually how you play to not lose, or to bring back minimize risk. Because the biggest risk in a game will always be your opponents. So the only way to minimize risk is to, well, control them. Judges always remind us that our opponents does not have our best intentions in mind. And that is true, but in cEDH it's actually more complicated because sometimes they do. The problem is, over time, the best players will convince you more and more into falling into doing their bidding. And there's only 2 ways to combat this that I know of. You can simply be better at the social game and win over your opponents instead of them. Or the other choice is to embrace the mechanical game. Focus on how do I win instead of what I'm afraid of or what the table needs of me. Playing aggressively is often really hard to combat politically. But don't mistake me, just because it's hard doesn't mean they won't. They'll usually use their superior knowledge or their whatever to tell you how you're incorrect for doing this and you should listen to me because I know best. Don't listen to them, except for me. I will never lie, except when I do. But I think that's enough of my soapbox, so let us return. If you've ever read about The Prisoner's Dilemma, you would know this, but if you haven't, I would recommend you actually do that. But in essence, The Prisoner's Dilemma is that 2 prisoners, in questioning from the police, get the deal: you can rat on your accomplice, and if you do, you go free. If you don't, you get 2 years in jail. The kicker, your accomplice has the exact same deal. And if you both tell on each other, you both get 3 years in prison. And what's fascinating is, in this example, even though you both technically would gain from not telling on each other, it's mathematically correct to tell on each other. And this concept is in part actually applicable to cEDH. Acting against the goodwill of the table is often in your advantage, be that by feeding Rhetoric, pushing early windows open, etc. Since cEDH has more participants, and the police isn't actually a neutral party in cEDH, the discussion is different than the base case, which you will find in the Wikipedia article. But when we also factor in the volatility of the format, playing to maximize your personal odds become even more important. It just costs even more socially, which makes it even harder, because your opponents are gonna be mad at you, and that's not easy to deal with, unless you just know that you're winning the game. So to summarize, here's the truth. Playing to not lose doesn't actually mean surviving. It usually means just stalling. It means doing someone else's work for them. And in the format as volatile as cEDH, that's just slowly going to be chipping away at your 25%. The players who win, they're not the ones waiting to untap with perfect info. They're the ones asking themselves every turn, is this my window? Is this enough? And when the answer is maybe, they go for it. Because in this game, hesitation is just a slower way to lose. I'm going to be real with you. You and I alone do not have the power to actually change the meta. It's going to take an even larger movement. The recent unbannings did nothing to help the narrative, and most people just straight up believe that Turbo is dead. The staunch defenders of Turbo are mostly gone from the format. So here is it. I will keep up the fight. Midrange Hell is a bore, and you'll catch me dead before you catch me casting a Seedborn Muse. That said, while we don't on our own have the power to escape, we do have the power to once again insert the discussion about how to actually win. Remind your friends that you can actually win without Cavern Souls plus Abolisher. Without the fact that the person keeping early interaction is very rarely the person actually winning the game. Don't let the cowards bully you into conforming to this current hellscape. Be the change you want to see in the world. And if you're wondering what decks to do this on, they've always been here. Rogsai, faster iterations of Timnakram, Najila, Malcolm Vile Smasher, Inala, heck, even the Mardu Summer decks. The whole concept was to push for a turn 2 or a protected turn 3. And honestly, that play pattern hasn't actually gotten much worse. Sure, the bans did hurt, but playing in turn 2 Garen Abolisher and winning turn 3 isn't that wild. But more importantly, Turbo isn't a deck, it's a mindset. Don't let them make you second guess yourself. There isn't actually that much interaction in this format, and pushing isn't as game ruining as it can look or even feel sometimes. I can often recuperate and try to combo again before my mid-range hell opponents even assemble their first win attempts. And this is actually even a better time than ever before. With the printing of Mistrais Village and Voice of Victory, we've never had more tools to go under the mid-range hell than we have today. So all in all, just remember, when you don't play to win and focus your energy on stopping your opponents, you aren't actually a threat, you're a speed bump.